thousands of brand new cars sit unsold, costing dealerships millions. And the shocking truth about what happens next will leave you speechless. Imagine shiny vehicles gathering dust for years, rotting away on dealership lots. They're not junk cars, but they might as well be. This is a crisis the automotive world wasn't ready for, and it's only getting worse. But why are dealerships holding on to cars that no one wants? And what does this mean for you? Could you snag a deal, or are you unknowingly buying a car with hidden problems? Stick around, this could change how you buy your next car. What's happening? Brand new cars, once the pride of dealerships, are now a financial burden, sitting unsold for hundreds of days. Before 2020, it was rare to see a car remain on the lot for more than 200 days. Today, some vehicles sit for 500 or even 700 days. The issue started with a combination of overproduction and shifting consumer preferences. Automakers forecast demand years in advance, producing vehicles they believe customers will want. But those forecasts didn't account for economic uncertainty, changing priorities, or the aftershocks of a global pandemic. As the world emerged from lockdowns, production resumed at full speed, but consumers had already shifted gears. Many turned to used cars or delayed purchasing altogether due to inflation and rising interest rates. Meanwhile, dealerships were flooded with new inventory, too much of it. Luxury vehicles, oversized SUVs, and high-end trucks are the hardest to move. They're expensive, and fewer buyers are willing to take on such financial commitments. The result? Dealerships across the country are stuck with aging inventory they can't sell. The costly cycle of unsold cars. The heart of the issue lies in how dealerships operate. Most don't outright own the cars on their lots. Instead, they finance their inventory through a process called floor planning. Think of it like a massive credit card for dealerships. They borrow money to stock their lots and pay it back when the cars sell. Here's the catch. The longer a car sits, the more it costs. Initially, the terms are favorable, interest-free for 60 or 90 days. But as time passes, interest rates climb to as high as 15%. For dealerships, every unsold car represents mounting debt. To minimize losses, dealerships deploy strategies to move aging inventory. They might offer bonuses, called spiffs, to incentivize sales staff to push specific cars. A salesperson could earn an extra $1,000 just for selling a vehicle that's been sitting too long. But even with these incentives, selling an old new car isn't easy. Customers prefer the latest models, not vehicles that feel outdated before they even leave the lot. At the same time, manufacturers aren't slowing down production. Cars keep arriving, adding to the backlog. It's a vicious cycle. Too much supply, too little demand, and no clear way out. The hidden costs. This growing problem doesn't just impact dealerships. It has ripple effects that touch consumers and the entire automotive industry. For buyers, unsold cars might seem like a golden opportunity to snag a deal, but there's a hidden cost. Vehicles that sit idle for months or years can develop issues like battery degradation, tire rot, and engine wear, even if they've never been driven. For dealerships, the financial burden is staggering. Interest payments on unsold inventory eat into profits, forcing some to lay off staff or close their doors entirely. General managers responsible for moving inventory often face termination if they can't meet sales targets. The industry as a whole is feeling the strain. Manufacturers, stuck in overproduction mode, risk damaging relationships with dealerships. Meanwhile, the glut of inventory forces prices down, which might seem like a win for consumers but destabilizes the market in the long run. And there's another consequence: trust. Customers who were charged exorbitant markups during shortages are now hesitant to return to the same dealerships. The result is a loss of loyalty that could take years to rebuild. Overproduction and its consequences. In the automotive industry, overproduction is like a ticking time bomb. Automakers rely on predictive models to decide how many cars to produce. These models use historical data, market trends, and projected consumer preferences, but in recent years, these predictions have been way off the mark. Why? Because the world has changed, and those models haven't kept up. Take a look at what happened during the global pandemic of the year 2020. Factories shut down, supply chains were thrown into chaos, and consumers paused big purchases. When the world started reopening, automakers rushed to make up for lost time, ramping up production to meet what they assumed would be skyrocketing demand. But the demand they anticipated never materialized. Consumers had new priorities. Rising costs of living and economic uncertainty meant fewer people were willing or able to spend tens of thousands of dollars on a new car. Instead of slowing production to match this reality, manufacturers doubled down. Why? Because cutting production is seen as a sign of weakness in the industry. Automakers fear losing their competitive edge, so they keep the factories running. But this strategy has backfired spectacularly. Dealerships are drowning in excess inventory, and unsold cars are piling up faster than ever. The consequences of overproduction aren't just financial, they're also environmental. Every unsold car represents wasted resources. The steel, aluminum, and plastics used to build these vehicles were extracted, processed, and shipped at enormous environmental costs. And for what? To sit idle, taking up space on dealership lots. It's a devastating example of how inefficiency in the supply chain can ripple out into broader harm. Greedy tactics by dealerships. While overproduction is a major factor, dealerships themselves aren't blameless in this mess. During the early stages of the pandemic, when supply was limited, dealerships took advantage of the situation. They slapped massive markups on vehicles, charging consumers thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars above the manufacturer's suggested retail price. It wasn't just a few bad apples either. This practice became widespread, with many dealerships justifying it as market adjustment fees. These tactics alienated countless customers. Families who needed reliable transportation found themselves priced out of the market, while others paid far more than they should have. The backlash was swift. Many buyers vowed never to return to dealerships that had taken advantage of the crisis. This loss of loyalty has hit dealerships hard now that the tables have turned. Today, those same dealerships are struggling to sell their inventory. Consumers remember how they were treated and are more than willing to walk away. What's more, the glut of unsold cars has forced many dealerships to slash prices, essentially undoing the inflated profits they made during the shortage. It's a painful lesson in how short-term greed can lead to long-term losses. Economic turmoil and consumer shifts. Another critical factor is the state of the economy. In the years following 2020, inflation soared to levels not seen in decades. Interest rates climbed higher, making it more expensive to finance a car. For many families, even a modest monthly car payment became unaffordable. This shift has pushed buyers toward the used car market, where prices are lower and financing terms are more flexible. But it's not just about affordability. Consumer habits have also changed. Younger generations in particular are less interested in owning a car outright. Many prefer alternatives like ride-sharing services, car subscriptions, or leasing. This shift is especially pronounced in urban areas where public transportation and shared mobility options are readily available. Automakers, however, have been slow to adapt to this new reality, continuing to churn out vehicles that fewer people want to buy. The types of cars consumers prefer have also evolved. In the past, gas-guzzling trucks and luxury SUVs dominated the market, but now there's a growing demand for smaller, more efficient vehicles as well as electric cars. Unfortunately, the production lines haven't caught up. Manufacturers are still producing too many high-end models that cater to a shrinking audience, while the demand for affordable and eco-friendly options continues to rise. The legacy of the pandemic. It's impossible to talk about this crisis without addressing the lasting impact of the global pandemic. The pandemic didn't just disrupt supply chains and production schedules. It also fundamentally changed how people think about transportation. During the height of lockdowns, many people realized they didn't need a car as much as they thought. Remote work eliminated the daily commute, while online shopping reduced the need for frequent trips. Even as restrictions eased, these habits persisted. For some, the idea of spending tens of thousands of dollars on a vehicle they rarely use no longer made sense. This shift has left automakers and dealerships scrambling to adjust. They're trying to entice buyers back with incentives like low-interest financing, cashback offers, and extended warranties. But these strategies can only do so much when the underlying demand simply isn't there. At the same time, the pandemic revealed just how fragile the automotive supply chain really is. Factory closures, shipping delays, and shortages of critical components like semiconductors created a cascade of problems that the industry is still dealing with. And while production has resumed, the backlog of unsold cars shows that the recovery hasn't been smooth. Environmental and social implications. The environmental cost of unsold cars is staggering. Manufacturing a single car requires significant energy and raw materials. The mining of metals like lithium, cobalt, and nickel for batteries, the processing of steel for frames, and the production of plastic for interiors all contribute to pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. When these cars remain unsold, that environmental impact feels even more wasteful. Beyond the environmental costs, there are social implications to consider. The financial strain of unsold inventory often leads to layoffs at both dealerships and manufacturing plants. Workers who built these cars expecting them to sell are now facing uncertain futures. Entire communities that rely on automotive jobs are feeling the pinch. And then there's the question of what happens to these cars in the long term. Some are repurposed, but many are eventually sold at a loss or scrapped. This cycle of waste is unsustainable, both economically and environmentally. It's a stark reminder that the industry needs to rethink its approach to production and sales. The future of the automotive industry. This crisis is forcing the automotive industry to confront some hard truths. For decades, the focus has been on growth, building more cars, selling more units, expanding market share. But in an era of economic uncertainty, environmental awareness, and shifting consumer priorities, that model no longer works. To survive, automakers and dealerships will need to innovate. This could mean producing fewer cars and focusing on quality over quantity. It could also mean investing in new sales models, like direct-to-consumer platforms that eliminate the need for traditional dealerships. Some companies are already experimenting with subscription-based services, allowing consumers to access a car without committing to ownership. Electric vehicles are also set to play a major role in reshaping the market. As governments push for cleaner transportation and consumers demand more sustainable options, the industry will need to shift gears. But this transition won't be easy. It requires significant investment in new technologies, infrastructure, and training. For dealerships, the path forward is even less clear. Many will need to diversify their offerings, focusing more on services like maintenance and repair rather than relying solely on sales. Others may need to consolidate or close altogether. It's a challenging time, but it's also an opportunity for reinvention. Consumer deals or hidden disasters. For many consumers, the idea of unsold cars piling up on dealership lots sounds like a golden opportunity. After all, dealerships desperate to move inventory are likely to offer significant discounts, right? On the surface, that's true. If you're in the market for a new vehicle, you might be able to find prices well below the manufacturer's suggested retail price. But before you jump on what seems like a great deal, it's important to consider the potential downsides. Cars that sit idle for months or even years can develop problems, even if they've never been driven. Tires can degrade and develop flat spots. Batteries may lose their charge or suffer long-term damage from disuse. Fluids like oil and coolant can deteriorate, potentially leading to engine issues down the line. And then there's the interior. Leather seats, electronics, and even plastic components can be affected by prolonged exposure to heat, cold, or humidity. For the consumer, this means that buying one of these new cars could come with hidden costs. You might save money up front, but you could end up paying more for repairs and maintenance over time. That's why it's crucial to thoroughly inspect any vehicle you're considering, especially if it's been sitting for an extended period. Ask for a detailed service history and ensure that the dealership has properly maintained the car while it was on the lot. The financial toll on dealerships. While unsold cars might create opportunities for consumers, they're a financial nightmare for dealerships. Every unsold vehicle represents not just a missed sale, but an ongoing expense. As we discussed earlier, dealerships finance their inventory through loans, paying interest on every car that remains unsold. The longer those cars sit, the more money the dealership loses. For dealerships with a lot of aging inventory, this can lead to drastic measures. Some resort to slashing prices, offering steep discounts just to get the cars off their lots. Others may cut costs elsewhere, laying off staff or reducing operating hours. In extreme cases, dealerships may be forced to close their doors entirely. This has ripple effects, not just for the dealership owners, but for their employees and the local economy. The financial pressure also affects how dealerships interact with customers. Salespeople are under immense pressure to move older inventory, often resorting to aggressive tactics. This can make the car buying process more stressful for consumers, as they're pushed toward vehicles they may not want or need. And while some customers may walk away with a great deal, others may feel pressured into buying a car they later regret. How this affects the automotive industry. The impact of unsold cars extends beyond dealerships, affecting the entire automotive industry. For manufacturers, the backlog of inventory is a clear signal that something needs to change. Overproduction is no longer sustainable, and the old more is better approach is showing its cracks. Automakers are being forced to reevaluate their production strategies, focusing on aligning supply with demand more accurately. One potential solution is a shift toward build-to-order models. Instead of flooding dealership lots with inventory, manufacturers could produce cars only after they've been ordered by customers. This approach would reduce waste, lower costs, and give consumers more control over the features and specifications of their vehicles. However, implementing such a system would require significant changes to the way the industry operates, from factory schedules to logistics. The crisis is also accelerating the push toward electric vehicles. As demand for traditional gas-powered cars declines, manufacturers are looking to electric models as the future of the industry. Governments around the world are offering incentives for electric vehicle adoption, and consumers are increasingly drawn to the promise of lower emissions and reduced fuel costs. But electric vehicles come with their own challenges, including higher upfront costs and the need for a robust charging infrastructure. For the industry as a whole, the unsold car crisis is a wake-up call. It's an opportunity to innovate and adapt, but it's also a stark reminder of the risks of clinging to outdated models, the long-term consequences for consumers. Beyond the immediate financial implications, this crisis has long-term consequences for consumers. One of the biggest risks is the potential for reduced competition in the automotive market. If dealerships and manufacturers struggle to stay afloat, we could see fewer options for buyers in the future. Smaller dealerships may be forced to close, consolidating the market and giving larger players more control over pricing and availability. Another concern is the quality of vehicles. As manufacturers scramble to cut costs, there's a risk that quality could suffer. Components might be sourced from cheaper suppliers, and corners could be cut in the production process. This could lead to a rise in recalls and warranty claims, eroding consumer trust in the industry. At the same time, the crisis is reshaping consumer expectations. Buyers are becoming more cautious, doing more research, and negotiating harder for the best deals. They're also looking for greater transparency, demanding to know how long a car has been sitting on the lot and what maintenance it has undergone. This shift in consumer behavior is forcing dealerships to adapt, offering more detailed information and better service to regain trust. The role of technology. Technology is playing a key role in addressing the challenges of unsold inventory. Data analytics and artificial intelligence are being used to improve forecasting, helping manufacturers better predict demand and avoid overproduction. These tools can analyze consumer behavior, economic trends, and even weather patterns to provide more accurate insights. Online sales platforms are also transforming the car buying process. Many dealerships now offer virtual showrooms, allowing customers to browse inventory, customize their vehicles, and even complete the purchase online. This not only makes the process more convenient for buyers, but also helps dealerships move inventory more efficiently. Subscription-based models are another innovation gaining traction. Instead of buying a car outright, consumers can pay a monthly fee to access a vehicle, with the flexibility to swap it out for a different model as their needs change. This approach appeals to younger generations who value convenience and flexibility over ownership. While these technological advancements offer promising solutions, they also raise questions. Will they truly address the root causes of overproduction, or will they simply shift the problem elsewhere? And how will they impact the relationship between consumers, dealerships, and manufacturers? The environmental cost of unsold cars. The problem of unsold cars goes far beyond dealership lots and financial losses. It has significant environmental implications. Manufacturing a single vehicle is an energy-intensive process. Steel for the frame, aluminum for the body, and rare metals like cobalt and lithium for batteries are all extracted from the earth, often with a high environmental cost. Every unsold car represents resources pulled from the planet that aren't being utilized. Consider the energy used during production. Factories require vast amounts of electricity, often generated from fossil fuels. Then there's the transportation of these vehicles, shipped from manufacturing plants to distribution centers, then to dealerships, all of which adds to the carbon footprint. When these cars sit unsold, they're not just wasting space, they're wasting the energy and resources that went into their creation. And if these vehicles eventually go to auction or are scrapped, the environmental cost only increases. Recycling the materials, though beneficial, still requires significant energy and contributes to emissions. And if the car ends up in a landfill, the waste becomes a long-term problem. This unsustainable cycle highlights a critical need for the automotive industry to rethink its production and inventory strategies. A double-edged sword. Technology has revolutionized the automotive industry, but it has also played a role in creating the current crisis. Advanced analytics and artificial intelligence are used to predict market demand, but even the most sophisticated algorithms can't account for sudden economic shifts or changes in consumer behavior. This reliance on technology has, in some ways, made the industry less adaptable. At the same time, technology offers potential solutions. Data analytics can help manufacturers refine their forecasts, reducing the likelihood of overproduction. Dealerships are using software to manage inventory more effectively, tracking which cars are selling and which aren't. Online platforms allow consumers to browse, customize, and purchase vehicles without stepping foot in a dealership, helping to move inventory faster. But these solutions aren't without challenges. As technology becomes more integrated into the car buying process, the role of traditional dealerships is changing. Many consumers prefer the convenience of buying online, but this shift could mean fewer jobs at brick-and-mortar locations. Additionally, the growing reliance on tech-driven solutions raises questions about data privacy and cybersecurity. While technology can help address the issue of unsold cars, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. The consumer mindset shift. The way consumers view car ownership is undergoing a seismic shift. For decades, owning a car was seen as a symbol of freedom and independence, but younger generations are rethinking that narrative. Many now see cars as a utility rather than a status symbol, preferring flexibility over commitment. Subscription-based services and ride-sharing platforms have gained popularity, especially in urban areas where owning a car is less practical. These models allow consumers to access vehicles without the long-term financial burden of ownership. It's a win for consumers, but it poses a challenge for traditional dealerships and automakers. If fewer people are buying cars, how can the industry sustain itself? Another factor driving this shift is environmental awareness. Many consumers are choosing to reduce their carbon footprint by driving less, opting for public transportation, or investing in electric vehicles. This shift in priorities is forcing automakers to adapt, but the transition hasn't been smooth. The production of electric vehicles requires significant upfront investment, and many manufacturers are struggling to balance this with the ongoing demand for traditional vehicles. For dealerships, this change in consumer mindset is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it opens up opportunities to explore new business models, like car subscriptions. On the other hand, it signals a decline in traditional car sales, which have long been the backbone of the industry. Legislative changes. The unsold car crisis has caught the attention of lawmakers, who are exploring ways to address the issue. One potential avenue is regulating production to prevent overstock. While this idea is controversial, proponents argue that it could help stabilize the market and reduce waste. Another focus is on consumer protection. During the shortages of the early 2020s, many buyers were subjected to excessive markups and hidden fees. Lawmakers are now pushing for greater transparency in pricing and stricter regulations on dealership practices. These measures aim to protect consumers while holding dealerships accountable for their actions. There's also growing interest in incentivizing sustainable practices. Governments around the world are offering tax breaks and subsidies for electric vehicles, encouraging automakers to shift away from traditional gas-powered cars. These policies could help reduce overproduction by aligning incentives with consumer demand for eco-friendly options. However, legislation alone won't solve the problem. It's up to automakers and dealerships to take responsibility for their role in the crisis. By embracing sustainable practices and prioritizing customer needs, the industry can begin to rebuild trust and chart a path forward. The path to sustainability. Sustainability is no longer just a buzzword, it's a necessity. For the automotive industry, this means rethinking every aspect of production, from the materials used to the way cars are sold. One promising development is the use of recycled materials in manufacturing. Automakers are exploring ways to repurpose steel, aluminum, and plastics, reducing the environmental impact of new cars. Another approach is optimizing production to minimize waste. This could involve adopting a just-in-time manufacturing model where vehicles are built to order rather than mass-produced. By aligning production with demand, automakers can reduce the risk of overstock while cutting costs. For dealerships, sustainability means finding new ways to move inventory. This might include partnering with ride-sharing companies to repurpose unsold cars or offering discounts to buyers who choose eco-friendly options. These strategies not only help reduce waste, but also align with the values of environmentally conscious consumers. Ultimately, the path to sustainability requires a shift in mindset. The focus can no longer be on producing as many cars as possible. Instead, the industry must prioritize efficiency, innovation, and responsibility. But what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comment below.